A medieval convent lit by candlelight. A record label run out of a house by women who had been locked out of every recording studio in the country. A concert hall that refused to perform a symphony the moment it learned a woman had written it. Every other list on this channel is about people erased for loving the wrong person. This one is about women erased twice over. Once for who they loved, and once before that, simply for being women who dared to compose at all. Here are 12 of them. Let us begin. Number 12. Hildegard von Bingen. We begin 900 years ago, with a woman so extraordinary the Catholic Church eventually made her a saint and a doctor of the Church, one of only a handful in 2,000 years. Hildegard von Bingen was a 12th century German abbess, a visionary, a scientist, and one of the very first composers in all of Western history whose name we actually know. Her soaring sacred chants are still recorded and sung today, and at the center of her life was a younger nun named Richardis, who worked as her assistant and helped compile her greatest visionary writings. The two were extraordinarily close. When church authorities moved Richardis away to head another convent, Hildegard was devastated and fought it with a furious campaign of letters, writing to bishops, to Richardis' family, even to the Pope to try to keep her. When Richardis died soon after, Hildegard wrote that she had cherished her with divine love. Now, I will be careful and honest. We cannot drop a modern label onto a medieval nun, and Hildegard's own writings condemned physical love between women. But the raw, aching intensity of her attachment to Richardis is right there in her own letters, and scholars have been reckoning with it for a very long time. Number 11. Marion Bauer. Marion Bauer was an American composer, critic, and teacher who helped shape modern music in early 20th century New York. She was a founding force behind organizations that championed new American composers. She taught at major universities, and she published a substantial body of orchestral and chamber music at a time when the concert world barely made room for women at all. Bauer never married, and she lived and moved within tight circles of independent, artistic women, and she is remembered in lesbian music history as one of their own. Like so many women of her generation, she left no dramatic public declaration, because her era offered her no safe way to make one. What she left instead was a life built entirely around women and around music, and a catalog of work that the standard histories of American music spent decades barely mentioning. She is here because the quiet ones count too, and because the erasing of women like her was done not with a scandal, but with a shrug. Number 10. Janis Ian. If you have ever heard the aching song at 17, that quiet anthem for everyone who felt unlovely and left out, you know the work of Janis Ian. She was a songwriting prodigy who scored her first controversial hit remarkably young, and later won a Grammy, one of the great singer-songwriters of her generation. And Janis Ian is a lesbian who came out publicly in the 1990s and later married the woman she loved. Look at the songs though, written long before she could safely say any of it. At 17 is a masterpiece about the pain of not fitting the world's narrow picture of who you are supposed to be and who you are supposed to want. She was writing the interior life of an outsider, with total honesty, decades before she was able to tell the world the specific truth at the center of it. The feeling was always there in the music, waiting for the rest of her to be allowed to catch up to it. Number 9. The founders of Olivia Records. This one is not a single person. It is an act of rebellion. In the early 1970s, two folk musicians, Meg Christian and Chris Williamson, made a startling realization. Being openly lesbian meant the entire music industry would keep them at arm's length, off the radio, off the major labels, out of the story. So they did something audacious. They built their own industry from scratch. They founded Olivia Records, a label owned and run entirely by women for women, and it became the beating heart of a whole movement known as women's music. Williamson's album, The Changer and the Changed, pressed by this tiny outsider operation, went on to sell over 100,000 copies, an almost unimaginable number for a record the mainstream had completely ignored. Think about what that means. Locked out of every existing door, a group of lesbian musicians simply built their own house and filled it and sold out. The industry tried to erase them by refusing to let them in, so they made the industry irrelevant and sang anyway. Number 8. K.D. Lang. In 1992, at the very height of her fame, a country and pop singer with one of the most beautiful voices of her generation did something that genuinely risked her whole career. K.D. Lang, adored by Nashville and the pop charts alike, publicly came out as a lesbian. This was not a safe moment to do it. Country music was, and largely still is, a conservative world, and there was a real cost. Some radio stations turned on her, but Lang refused to shrink. She stood there as a proudly out gay woman, kept making gorgeous, genre-crossing music, and won Grammy after Grammy anyway. She helped write the songs that made her famous, and she made being an openly gay woman in mainstream music look not like a tragedy or a confession, but simply like the truth, sung beautifully by someone who was done hiding. A lot of women who came after her walked through a door she pushed open first. Number 7. Melissa Etheridge. Melissa Etheridge is a rock and roll powerhouse, a raspy-voiced singer-songwriter behind a string of anthemic hits, and the writer of an Academy Award-winning song. And in 1993, she came out as a lesbian, publicly and without apology, in the middle of a mainstream rock career. Etheridge did not treat it as a scandal to be managed. She treated it as a fact to be lived out loud, becoming one of the most visible openly gay musicians in the world through the exact years when that was still genuinely dangerous for a career. She wrote her own songs, poured her own heart into them, and then stood on enormous stages and tapes and dedicated that heart plainly to women. For a lot of people in the 1990s, she was simply the first openly gay person they ever saw be that comfortable, that powerful, and that unbothered about it. That visibility was its own kind of music. Number 6, Wendy and Lisa. You have heard they're playing on some of the most famous records of the 1980s, because Wendy Melvoin and Lisa Coleman were the heart of the band behind one of the most legendary pop albums ever made. And when that chapter ended, the two of them went on to become one of the most in-demand composing teams in Hollywood, writing the scores for hit television shows and winning an Emmy. Wendy and Lisa were, for years, not just musical partners, but a couple, two gay women making music together at the absolute top of the industry. And for a long time, that part of the story stayed quietly in the background, while their playing and their scores were celebrated. They are a perfect example of a pattern this channel keeps finding. The work gets the spotlight, and the love behind it gets left in the shadows, until someone finally turns the light around and points it where it always should have been. Number 5, St. Vincent. Annie Clark, who performs under the name St. Vincent, is one of the most inventive and acclaimed musicians working today. A virtuoso guitarist and a genuinely visionary composer whose albums have won the top honors in the industry. She writes, plays, and produces music that sounds like almost nothing else. And she is openly queer, having had public relationships with women, and she moves through the modern music world with that as simply one true fact among many, not a secret, not a scandal, not the tragedy at the center of her life. Sit with the distance between her and the woman who opens this list, a medieval nun who could pour her love for another woman only into letters and chants and prayers. St. Vincent gets to put it in the work, in the interviews, in the open, and still be celebrated as one of the most important composers of her generation. She is what 900 years of these women were reaching toward. Number 4, Brandi Carlile. Brandi Carlile is one of the most decorated songwriters in modern American music. A folk and Americana artist with a voice that can level a stadium and a shelf full of Grammy Awards to show for it. And she has been openly gay her entire public career, married to a woman, raising a family, and writing about all of it without a shred of disguise. What makes Carlile matter so much here is how completely ordinary she has made it look. She writes aching, honest songs about her wife, about her kids, about her faith and her doubts, and she sings them to enormous crowds who sing every word right back. She took the thing that, for every earlier woman on this list, had to be hidden, coded, or paid for with a career, and she simply made it the plain, beating subject of her art in the open, and got showered with the industry's highest honors for it. She is living proof of how far the door has finally swung. Number 3, Pauline Oliveros. Pauline Oliveros was one of the most important experimental composers of the 20th century, a pioneer of electronic music who spent her life expanding the very definition of what music could be. She developed a whole philosophy and practice she called deep listening, and she is a towering foundational figure in modern American composition. And Oliveros was an openly lesbian woman and a leader in both feminist and gay musical movements at a time when that took real courage in the buttoned-down world of academic music. She did not separate who she was from what she made. Her radical openness about listening, about presence, about breaking down the old hierarchies of composer and performer, ran right alongside her openness about her own life. She shared her final decades with her partner. She proved that a woman could be, at once, completely out and completely revered as a serious composer. and she helped drag the classical establishment, slowly, toward catching up with her. Number 2, Jennifer Higdon. Jennifer Higdon is, quite simply, one of the most successful composers alive. Her orchestral works are performed constantly by the great orchestras of the world. She has won the Pulitzer Prize for Music. She has won 3 Grammy Awards. She teaches the next generation at one of the finest conservatories in America. By any measure, she sits at the very top of contemporary classical music. And she is a lesbian, married to her wife of well over 3 decades, Cheryl Lawson, and Paulson, and completely open about it. Hold that fact next to everything you have just heard on this list. 900 years ago, a woman like her could only be a nun writing coded devotion. 100 years ago, she would have struggled to get a single note performed simply for being a woman. And here she is, at the summit of the same art form, an out gay woman collecting its highest prizes, with her wife's name in the program. She is not hiding a thing, and it has cost her nothing. That is the ending every woman before her deserved and did not get. Number 1. She was a force of nature. A composer who wrote grand operas and a thundering mass at a time when the concert world flatly refused to take a woman seriously, and who became the first woman ever made a dame for her music. But her single most famous moment did not happen in a concert hall at all. It happened in a prison. Her name was Ethel Smyth. In 1912, she was locked up in Holloway Prison alongside dozens of fellow suffragettes for hurling a rock through a politician's window in the fight for women's right to vote. And she had written the movement its anthem, a rousing song called The March of the Women. So, when a fellow composer came to visit her, he witnessed something he never forgot. Down in the courtyard, the imprisoned suffragettes were marching in a circle and singing Smith's anthem at the top of their lungs, and up at an overlooking window stood Smith herself, leaning out of her cell, beating time for them, conducting the whole glorious act of defiance with a toothbrush. And here's the part the history books were slowest to print. Ethel Smyth was a lesbian, openly and unapologetically, across a long life full of passionate love for women, from a sewing machine heiress who became her lover, to, at the age of 71, a profound love for the writer Virginia Woolf, of whom she wrote, "I don't think I have ever cared for anyone more profoundly." She was erased twice, and she refused both erasures with the same ferocity. They tried to ignore her music because she was a woman, so she forced her operas onto the world's stages anyway. They would have buried her love because it was for women, so she wrote about it in her memoirs, plainly, and dared anyone to look away. She spent her whole life conducting defiance from an overlooking window. She just did it, at the end, for all of us.